What's happening, everybody? It's Sean with Reactions to the Classics. Today we got a reaction. Top 10 songs of the band Sweet, brought to us by a friend, longtime supporter, and patron of the channel, Evan David. Thank you, Evan David. Appreciate you. Appreciate all the patrons that make this thing go. If you'd like to support us in any way, check out the Patreon link below or the Patreon link on the end screen. Now, I'm going to tell you before I even get started on this. If you want to watch the whole video, right, with the music, and there's 8 music videos in here, then click on the Vimeo link below right now, because the music won't be on the YouTube version because it'll get blocked. So I'm going to get that out of the way right away. And I'm going to do that because Evan David always includes a ton of research. And this one is bigger than any one that he's ever done. So I wanted to not sit through all that and then go, wait a minute, the music isn't here. So let's get after it. This is all Evan David's words. He says, rock and roll legend has it that the band that would become known as The Sweet would begin to coalesce together in London in early 1968 when Glasgow-born vocalist Brian Conley and West London-born drummer Mick Tucker sought to form a new band out of the ashes of their recently dissolved previous one, a soul-based outfit called Wainwright's Gentlemen. The two then recruited Middlesex-born bassist Steve Priest from another local West London band called The Army, and with another Wainwright's Gentlemen alumni, Frank Torpey, on guitar, finally came together to form a group that was initially dubbed The Sweet Shop. Priest later recalled that there were many bands around at this time that had these silly names like Marmalade, Strawberry Jam, or Strawberry Alarm Clock, so we managed to come up with a silly name too. Over the next few months, the new group would gradually develop a local live following before finally coming to the attention of producer Phil Wainman, who was sufficiently impressed to offer them a chance to record their debut single, Slow Motion, which would duly be released on Fontana Records in July of 1968. But not as The Sweet Shop, since it turned out that another, what are the odds of this, unrelated band had also released their own single under that name a few months before, leading the band to hastily shorten their name to The Sweet. Sadly, however, while Slow Motion was a perfectly decent song in its own right, it did not make a dent in the charts, leaving the band to resume gigging on the local circuit for another year or so, until a tired Frank Torpey decided to leave in July of 1969, seeing no future for the band. Torpey would at first be replaced as the Sweet's guitarist by one Mick Stewart until he himself quit a year later in the summer of 1970, right? It's hard gigging, man, and just going around and grinding, right? Because you're making no money, you might be losing money. With the band having released 3 more flop singles in the interim for EMI Records, none of which managed to make the charts. Brian Conley later remarked that, quote, we had a couple of years, like 2.5 years, up and down, up and down, up and down. Actually, this is a good point to stress because we've done the road work, we've grafted, we've done the 20-pound a-nighters, and that's where a lot of the best bands are, right? REM's a great example. There's years and years of grinding. Then when they finally come out with a record, it's like great because they're already a well-tuned machine. It was at this point, however, that the Sweet's fortunes began to turn in a more positive manner after a further chance encounter between Conley, Tucker, and Wainman at the BBC radio studios in June of 1970 led the former two to ask the producer whether he had any good songs for them. As it turned out, he did, with Wainman himself taking up the story as follows. He says, I'd only just been introduced to songwriters Nicky Chen and Mike Chapman, and I did have their song called Funny Funny, and I said to the band it would be great, if you put your voices on this song, that would be of great interest. Why don't you come over to my flat over the weekend? So anyway, they turned up and they did the vocals, and the vocals were great, absolutely great, and they actually did it credit. They really did. They worked it all out between them, and it all happened very, very quickly. While waiting for Wainman to find them another record label who would be interested in releasing Funny Funny. Meanwhile, the band, in the meantime, that held auditions for a new guitarist, eventually pumping for Wrexham-born Welsh musician Andy Scott, who would perform his first gig with the band in Redcar in September of 1970. With Scott now firmly in place as the last piece of what would soon become Sweet's classic lineup, the band went on to sign a management deal with Chen and Chapman, who would go on to write the A-sides of all the band's early hits, with Wainman remaining as the band's producer as the group signed for RCA Records, who finally released Funny Funny in March 1971, whereupon it eventually reached number 13 in the UK singles charts, as well as achieving top 10 or greater success in several other countries in Europe. So began a musical odyssey, which would see the Sweet eventually rack up another 15 top 40 UK hit singles, as well as recording 9 studio albums during the group's original lifetime, eventually selling over 35 million albums worldwide in the process up to the present day, which is 2023 right now. To begin with, many of these early hits were in the rich bubblegum vein in which Chen and Chapman had quickly come to specialize as songwriters, with producer Wainman many years later remarking that, quote, suddenly Sweet were on the map. But they were a teeny bop band. They weren't anything, serious. I knew they could be serious, but hey, let's just sell records and make a career of it. Let's see how many we can do. This approach, while hugely successful in chart terms, would nevertheless later have its own drawbacks. For as Brian Conley put it, quote, "The early singles were very commercial, but it was down to the producer, really. It wasn't that the record's good because the Sweet did it. It was that the record's good because it was well produced, and that was it. We got no respect at all." As time went on, however, Sweet's chart-focused musical approach would evolve still further, as the band became one of the most prominent participants in the glowing glam rock scene of early 1970s Britain, a scene in which, in and of itself, furthermore shared many of the defining musical characteristics with its bubblegum predecessors. In any case, with writer Carl Caffarelli, for one, remarking that glam records were catchy, clunky, artificial creations designed to grab you with mindless, repetitive, and frequently irresistible hooks. And we got a lot of that nowadays, right? It's not a huge jump from Ohio Express to the Sweet, end quote. As such, the glam rock era was seemingly tailor-made for the Sweet, and not only in musical terms either, for the band also proved to be past masters at concocting the kind of outlandish costumes and flamboyant stage makeup which would enable them to stand out even then by the then thoroughly glitter-strewn environment of the Top of the Pops and other such shows of the period, culminating in two particularly memorable Top of the Pops appearances to promote their first, as it turned out, only UK #1 single, The Unforgettable Blockbuster, in 1973. Sweet would also maintain an equally impressive and certainly equally outrageous reputation as concert performers to boot during this time, despite various unsavory incidents at gigs infamously leading to them being banned from performing in the prestigious Mecca chain of ballrooms in Britain, as well as being unable to tour Belgium for fear of being arrested. And it was their live prowess which persuaded Chen and Chapman to increasingly give the band far more leeway when it came to performing their own record, as opposed to using session musicians as backing for the band's always impressive vocal harmonies, which had been the case. Andy Scott will later describe the atmosphere behind the seismic musical change as follows, quote, "We had hardly any input into anything for the first year and a half. And once you've had 2 or 3 hits, you're starting to be like the bull in the bull ring, stamping your feet a little bit and snorting. We can do better than this." And it wasn't until Chapman came with us up to a gig in Scotland, and he saw the reactions of the crowd, not to the singles, but to the other songs we were playing, like the Who medley that we're still playing and things like that he realized the change had to come musically. All you can do is to keep saying to the powers that be, if you're going to write us something that we're going to be able to hold our heads up and say, wow, this is great. Indeed, the Scottish gig in question would prompt Chapman to write one of Sweet's most definitive hits of all, the Ballroom Blitz, of which more later. Chen, on the other hand, would sum up both his and Chapman's own perspectives on the Sweet's then evolving creative situation as follows. They were writing the B-sides, and I think creatively they were getting off on that. They knew that they were writing their kind of music on the B-sides. They were growing in their confidence of themselves and everything, and with that comes a feel of where they want to go. The songs were rockier and harder, and I think they emerged as Mike and I hung out with the band socially, and we began to get into their psyche and into their minds, if you like, and understood that these guys weren't really a bubblegum band. It doesn't matter what Mike and I or Phil came up with. They had to translate it, and they had this huge musical energy, and a lot of them ideas themselves. So again, without a doubt, they were a massive contribution to the sound and energy of those records. By mid-1974, however, the Sweet's growing artistic discontent was coupled with a situation whereby not only were their Chen and Chapman penned glam rock singles, and indeed glam rock itself as a genre beginning to wane in terms of their UK chart success, but seemingly and largely unbeknownst to the band members themselves, increasingly serious struggles for creative control were occurring behind the scenes between Wayman versus Chen and Chapman, with the former later claiming that, quote, "Nicky and Mike didn't feel that I was doing enough as a manager to warrant being part of the management team. There's an old saying that where there's a hit, there's a writ, and it became quite money-led, and there's a lot of internal politics going on. If they could get rid of me, they would do. They really wanted to take it all on. They wanted to produce the boys and write for the boys and manage the boys, and I wasn't having that. I had to kind of forever justify my being there, and it was tough. Very, very tough." Sooner had this ongoing creative feud seemingly been resolved in Chen and Chapman's favor when Wayman finally quit producing for the Sweet. However, then the two songwriters would perhaps undergo something of a taste of their own medicine when the band themselves went rogue, so to speak, in early 1975, recording and releasing not only the B-side, but also the fantastic A-side of their latest single, Fox on the Run, seemingly without either their involvement or even their knowledge. Andy Scott later explained that, quote, "Got to a point with the producers and the songwriters prior to this where they were at loggerheads, and it was starting to affect the band a little bit. The fact that if they couldn't agree, then where were we going to be? So we decided to take our own destiny into our own hands, really. And if that hadn't been for that record, executives at RCA telling us that Fox on the Run is commercial enough for our next single, we never may have made the leap. So with a kind of cloak and dagger type of feeling, we went into the studio behind the backs of everybody. It's probably the best sounding record that we'd made, and it just so happened that it coincided with us going to America for the first time. Hence, it was our biggest selling record worldwide. So we really felt like we'd made the right decision by leaving everybody else behind and moving on. Chen, in turn, however, would later say that Fox on the Run was a fabulous record and it was a great pop song, but they did it while Mike and I were in California without us knowing and behind our backs. We came back and we found that out and we said, that's it, it's finished, because we felt we'd been treated really badly after all those hit records, and we felt we'd been treated deceitfully. I believe from what I've heard since that they were only too happy to continue to work with us after that. If they hadn't come up with the right song, they probably had recorded ours, but we made the decision that we weren't going to work with a band that had treated us like that after all of the time. All it needed was just to tell us, but they hadn't been straight with us. Indeed, the band's links to the Wayman and Chen and Chapman in turn now seemingly permanently severed from 1975 onwards. The Sweet were now free to fully exercise their own creative powers for the first time, with Andy Scott gleefully recalling how we are now the producers, the writers, and we're having our biggest success ever. It was just a fantastic moment to think, quote, wow, why had we waited so long? And because of other people's infighting, it's brought the band closer together. It's catapulted us into a different musical era, so that we're now not in the teen magazines, we're in all these rock magazines, and the whole thing just shifted so fantastically that we couldn't wait to carry on. Despite recording several more often top-notch singles and albums over the next few years, however, and with notable exceptions such as their last worldwide top 10 hit, 1978's majestically progressive-sounding Love is Oxygen, as time wore on, the Sweet were nevertheless finding it increasingly difficult to translate their newfound artistic success into commercial ones on any kind of consistent basis, especially given the radical shifts in musical climate that took place during this time due to the rise of punk in particular, with Sweet biographer Darren Thompson later remarking that, quote, it would be a supreme irony for Sweet that just as they had finally thrown off the shackles of the manufactured pop world and immersed themselves fully into the business of hard rock respectability that they so craved, that the very genre itself was facing something of a crisis. Of even greater significance as far as the band was concerned, however, was the fact that their lead singer Brian Connolly was now in the grips of a severely debilitating drinking problem, and one which, when coupled with the prior long-standing damage caused by throat injuries he had suffered during a street fight back in 1974, not only increasingly severely damaged his effective singing range, but also led them to be increasingly erratic and unreliable on stage, leading in the end to one particularly disastrous gig in Birmingham, Alabama in 1978, where a drunkenly incoherent Connolly collapsed on stage in front of an audience which included several record executives. In the wake of this incident, Brian's days as a member of Sweet were clearly numbered, and he formally quit the band in February 1979, leading the rest of the band to carry on as a three-piece, releasing a further 3 albums in turn, before finally dissolving the band in 1982. 2 years later, however, Andy Scott and Mick Tucker resurrected their own version of Sweet as an ongoing band in 1986, going on to record a further 5 studio albums as Andy Scott's Sweet, up to the present day, despite Tucker dying from leukemia in 2002 at the age of 54. Moreover, both Connolly, whose own untimely demise took place due to liver failure in 1997 at the age of 51, and Steve Priest, who had already relocated to America in the wake of the original band's demise, who would himself die in 2020, would later front their own entirely separate versions of Sweet in turn. That's always so confusing, right? On a wider level, however, Sweet's raucously life-affirming music has nevertheless gone on to inspire future glam metal-esque bands such as Def Leppard, Kiss, and Motley Crue. Only one of those groups is great, but I'll let you figure out which one. While their most famous tunes have also been widely used, either as the original versions or as covers in numerous films and TV shows ranging from Wayne's World, more on that later, to the Guardians of the Galaxy to Scooby-Doo. To sum up the ongoing musical impact of Sweet, therefore, it is fitting to quote their last survivor as of this writing, which I'm in May of 2023, Andy Scott once again, who noted that, quote, it's almost like 3 different careers, if you like. The early days of the real bubblegum things, the middle years of the hard rock, glam rock, pop thing, and Fox on the Run started us into the progressive, more serious rock era, which has run through till today. Certainly the band proved to be more than capable of mastering all 3 of these seemingly disparate musical era genres, and someone who has a distinct musical sweet tooth, Evan David says, if you will, ever since first hearing Blockbuster on a 70s compilation cassette back in the early 90s. I tried to construct this Sweet top 10 in a way that reflects this stylistic evolution. But as ever, please feel free, more than free, to disagree with my choices and to leave your own Sweet top 10 lists in the comments below in turn. So in case you forgot, the music and videos will not be in this video, but go to a Vimeo link below and you can see all of it. Let's start this thing out. 8 of these 10 are videos, so you're not going to see anything on a Spotify bar. We got Hellraiser at number 10. Evan David says, first released as a non-album single in April of 1973 and reaching number 2 in the UK. Andy Scott would describe the genesis of this hard-rocking daredevil of a tune as follows, quote, "We were in Hong Kong at the time when we got Mike's demo of Hellraiser. It's an absolutely fantastic vibe with interesting kind of guitar riffs, and we definitely wanted to put a bit of playing into this one. At that time, it was what was needed. Something that was a little bit more edgy, more musicians look at what a pop band should be doing. And I remember Ozzy Osbourne saying that it was his favorite single of the year. Moreover, according to songwriter Nicky Chin, Hellraiser didn't get written by accident. Hellraiser is exactly what Sweet were." So we're going to react to a clip of this tune being played live at the Rainbow Theatre in London in December of 1973. All right, I'm going to have the lyrics up as always. Thanks again, Evan David. All right, Hellraiser. A good song, good rocking song, way more rocking than I thought, but, he does mention that in the write-up Evan David does of what they had to say about it. It's not the bubblegum, but I'm sure we're going to get to some of the bubblegum as well. But, the costume's definitely flamboyant, but good drumming, guitar work, vocals fine. So, I could see why this might have been Ozzy's favorite single of the year. Next up, number 9, we got Funny Funny. First released as a single in January of 1971, reaching 13 in the UK, and later included as part of Sweet's first studio album, Funny How Sweet Coco Can Be, in November of the same year. As mentioned above, this was in fact the Sweet's debut single, and moreover serves both as perhaps the most insidiously earwormy example of the group's bubblegum face. We'll have a dichotomy here from the first song, as well as excellent showcase of the band's ever-impressive vocal harmonies, even at this early stage of their career. After all, as Andy Scott later put it, each member of the band had a lead-type voice in different ranges. That's why you ended up with the texture of voice that you get on a Sweet record. The final part of that jigsaw was the fact that Phil, having found Nicky and Mike, actually now had a product with a lead singer who looked like Brian Conway to push it and propel it. And after Funny Funny, we were all believers. We were thinking, we're off, So not a video on this one, but also not on Spotify, so I'll be playing just a YouTube audio of it. All right, Funny Funny. Just his love for this girl is undying, right? She does all these things to him, makes him feel all in love. But definitely the bubble gummy there. And you can see Brian's voice in a much more refined than in Hellraiser. It was good, man. The harmonies, all that good stuff. Very well produced, as they had alluded to before with a lot of these. All right, next up, number 8, Little Willy. First released as a non-album single in May 1972, reaching number 4 in the UK, 3 in the US. This irresistibly innuendo-laden, yet still childishly gleeful tune would also unwittingly serve as a key turning point in the Sweet's musical evolution when it was memorably performed live on the Top of the Pops in June of 1972. For it was on that occasion that they would not only start to fully adopt the glittering onstage trappings of glam rock for the first time, but also, due to musicians' union rules governing the show at the time, be forced to provide a new backing tape for the performance, which featured the band themselves playing the tune, rather than session musicians who'd been on the record. This, in turn, would have its own profound effect upon Sweet's later career, for as Mick Tucker later put it, quote, "Mike Chapman walked in on us as we were listening to the playback, and his mouth was just hanging open. He heard what we did, and he realized that we were just as good as the session players, and probably better because we actually cared what the record sounded like, and put some of our own personality into it." So we're going to look at that Top of the Pops performance. All right, Little Willy, by far the most catchy song on here so far. The harmonies, the way the drumming and the guitar work came in. One of the guys, a little more, the guitarist in the far, a little more into the glam rock so far than the other guys. Even though the other guys were going in a little bit, he's ahead of the curve over there. But, a very, very catchy song. I can see why it was the highest charting song they ever had in the States. Next up at number 7, we have Teenage Rampage. First released as a non-album single in January 1974 and reaching number 2 in the UK. This rollicking rabble-rouser of a tune has nevertheless since come to be regarded by some as something of a musical underachievement by Sweet's increasingly high standards, with Andy Scott himself later suggesting that, quote, "Teenage Rampage was basically son of Blockbuster, and without the crowd chants may not have been as big a hit as it was. There's probably a bit of frustration from the band because even though Teenage Rampage was a big success, don't get me wrong, we felt it was a slightly backward step after the Ballroom Blitz, of which more later," Evan David says. "This is a bit of a shame as far as for one I'm concerned, however, as I've always enjoyed its tongue-in-cheek take on the then much vaunted possibilities of youthful rebellion. Performed live on the legendary British kids TV show Cracker Jack in January of 1974. That's what we're going to be watching. All right, Teenage Rampage. I mean, Brian having a, I don't know if that was a tiger with more like maybe a leopard jaguar on him, you know, like we're getting after this. And the effects, the little wavy effects of the video guy blurring it up for us a little bit. Really good performance, man. The song, you know, it's a teen angst. This is the stereotypical teen angst, you know, join that teenage revolution. And the more it went on and the nice harmonies in there, it was also catchy. But the Teenage Rampage, man, let's go. All right, I can finally put up the Spotify bar. Only for one song, though. We got the 16s. First release as a single, and the band's first since Phil Wayman was ousted as Sweet's producer in July of 1974, reaching number 9 in the UK. Later included as part of Sweet's third studio album, Desolation Boulevard, November 1974. This melodramatically epic saga of 3 teenage couples trying to cope with the transition from the hippie optimism of the swinging 60s to the far more jaded cynicism of the 70s has become a firm favorite of both the vast majority of Sweet fans and indeed of the band members themselves. The latter, perhaps eerily shown when it was used as a part of Brian Connolly's funeral service following his untimely death. Indeed, both Connolly's voice and Mick Tucker's drumming in particular are in fine, energetic form throughout this song. While its unusually mature subject matter compared to much of the Sweet's musical output, perhaps provides fleeting hints of what might have been possible had the band's partnership with Chen and Chapman not been severed so abruptly shortly afterwards. While Andy Scott, for one, later recalling that, quote, I really felt that this was possibly another number 1 record because it was very, very different. For me, it's probably the best song that Mike Chapman ever wrote. All right, the 16s, play on words there. Definitely the most mature song, definitely the most well-written song. Just talking about the evolution of life, right? When we're carefree as teens and then life gets much more serious. And we got a little shout out in there, actually, of the album title, Desolation Boulevard, inside of there. And Dream they saw their name in lights on Desolation Boulevard. They'll light the faded light. Susie and Davy, you can make it. So we're encouraging Susie and Davy at different parts in this song. But yeah, that was a good offering. Now we're to the top half of this list. We have the Ballroom Blitz. First released as a non-album single in September of 73 and reaching number 2 in the UK, 5 in the US. This is by far and away, if not the most popular and certainly the most easily recognizable Sweet tune as far as the general public worldwide are concerned. Not least because how often it has been used on film and TV ever since. Most famously, of course, so in the first Wayne's World movie, which is where I know this from. As far as the original Sweet tune itself is concerned, however, it seems that, well, it was indeed first inspired by Mike Chapman's mind-blowing experiences of the crowd at the infamous Scottish Sweet gig already mentioned above, with Andy Scott later elaborating that Chapman, quote, came up to see Sweet in a limousine with us, and what he saw in the Scottish ballroom was mayhem. Brian and I both ended up in the audience with girls with scissors trying to cut your hair and all this kind of stuff going on. And he said it was a blitz. It was Blitzkrieg. And he wrote Ballroom Blitz the next day. The final musical end product of all this was clearly magical, with Chapman's songwriting partner Nicky Chen later insisting that, quote, I think it's a definitive Sweet record. It was everything about them, the energy, the drive, the performance, the vocals, the musicianship, everything. If ever a band was about a blitz of any kind, it was Sweet. And they were the very ballrooms they got banned from, remember. We're going to look at their official promo video, which Evan Davis says captures their power and especially Mick Tucker's peerless drumming. The Ballroom Blitz. I mean, I thought Brian's voice sounded the best on this of any song so far. I mean, I think this is them just in full power, right? Because the instrumentation's great. Little trading off of vocals there. And just the change in tempo of this song. The song's just masterfully done, right? So coming in at number 5 may surprise a lot of people. I don't know any of their stuff from them. It's just a fantastic song, man. So well done. Next up at number 4, we have Action. First released as a single in July of 1975. Number 15 in the UK, 20 in the US, and later included, albeit in a different version, as part of Sweet's 4th studio album, Give Us a Wink, in February 1976. This furiously overwhelming musical roller coaster of a tune would later be covered by longtime Sweet fans, the great Def Leppard, and was partly inspired by the band's, I added the great in there, by the way, by the band's ongoing frustrations in trying to assert their own identity, following the recent splits with Chen and Chapman, and in particular by the fact that, as Steve Priest later put it, quote, it seemed to me that everyone around us was getting rich, and we were not. Andy Scott, meanwhile, described how we got together after Fox on the Run and realized we needed a special song, a special record. And so this is probably the first time where we actually sat down and tried to design a single, if you like. I remember writing pages of stuff about singles that you liked and why and what little things in there were hallmarks of why you love that single. And we're taking bits away from all of them. It's almost like designing a single. And that's exactly what we did. We're going to look at the official promo video. Evan David says it amply captures the band's evolving post-glam hard rock image, and with Brian Connolly in particular delivering an impassioned vocal performance, it must surely rank as one of his very best. All right, Action, little flex lyrically on for Brian there. He's the man, right? Yeah, I agree with Evan David. A fantastic vocal performance. Rocking. They have a different look. Obviously, they've got more of the rock look here. Just really, really well done. But you can tell it's a band that's been together for a while, man. And yeah, that was a really, really good song. Next up at number 3, we got Wig Wam Bam. First released as a non-album single in September of 1972, 4 in the UK. This nonsensically catchy tune is perhaps the most perfect example of a bubblegum/glam rock hybrid tune that you're ever likely to find. For while it's 100% pure bubblegum lyrics, craft a seamlessly childish yet strongly innuendo-laden tale of Native American romance reminiscent of youthful games of cowboys and Indians. Any lingering thoughts of childhood innocence are swiftly undermined by the raucous instrumental backing that is not only 100% pure distilled glam rock, which also represents the first time that the band members of Sweet were allowed to play as well as sing on one of their own records to boot. We're going to look at it being performed live on Top of the Pops in October of 72, which sees Steve Priest in particular in full-on Native American getup, a sight for which I can only issue apologies in advance to any Native American members of the RTTC community who might be offended by the whole thing, which that whole thing is offensive. I almost didn't show the video because of that, but I'll go ahead and show it because that's what Evan David wanted, so let's check it out. Okay, Wig Wam Bam, very catchy. That's about all I'm going to say about it. I think the performance is probably offensive to a lot of people. I think the song itself is probably offensive to a lot of people, so I'm just going to leave that one there. Let's go to number 2. We have Blockbuster, first released as a non-album single in January 1973, and finally reaching number 1 in the UK Top 40 Singles charts, the only Sweet single to do so. This electrifying tune was the first Sweet song that I ever heard as a teenager, Evan David says. It remains as one of my all-time favorites ever since. A sentiment echoed by Andy Scott, who remarked how it possessed all the necessary ingredients for chart success as follows, quote, I remember Mick Tucker and I discussing the fact that there wasn't much song in Blockbuster. There's a lot of elements surrounding it, you know. It had the Steve Priest bit, it had the high screeching vocals, it had the siren, it had the guitar riff that everybody knew from the old blues and rock records, and it had a hellish, thunderous beat, you know. So in one way, you start to think, could we get a number 1 with this? And on the other side, you start to think, yes, of course we can. So we're going to look at it being performed live on the Top of Pops in January of 1973. Blockbuster, what a play on words about a guy named Buster, right? But very catchy. Thought the guys looked good on stage performing. Mixed drumming was really good. The vocals were in tune for sure. Really nice. Yeah, I mean, the video effects guys, the producers at Top of the Pops need to calm down. You know, it was the early 70s, man. We had all these new video toys, and we were going to use them all. All right, number 1, you might have already figured out if you know a lot about the Sweet. I don't know, we're Sweet. We got Fox on the Run, first released as part of Sweet's 3rd studio album, Desolation Boulevard, which we already heard some stuff off of in November 1974. And later as a much revamped single version in March 1975, number 2 in the UK, 5 in the US. As mentioned above, this is the very first tune with which Sweet first truly asserted their musical independence from the likes of Chen and Chapman, and has since gone on to achieve great worldwide success ever since. Recently going so far as to reach number 1 in the iTunes rock chart in 2016, following its use in the trailer for the second Guardians of the Galaxy movie. As such, it seems to be a truly fitting candidate for the top spot on this list, even if its spellbinding mixture of hard rock and keyboard-led instrumentals coupled with typically sweet vocal harmonies hadn't already made it one of my own personal favorites. We're going to watch the Top of the Pops performance from March of 1975. Number 1, Fox on the Run. All right, Fox on the Run. I think a very fitting number 1. It seems like I know that song, but I don't know what I would know it from. But everything firing there, right? The musicianship was great. Vocals were fantastic. The guys not glam rocked up, right? They look good. Not that the glam rock doesn't look good. They look like they've aged a ton, right? You always notice that with 70s musicians. It looks like in 60s musicians. It seems like they age at warp speed, but a great number 1. Now we got several honorable mentions, as Evan David always has. I'll go through them quickly. Slow Motion, Chop Chop, Alexander Graham Bell, Santa Monica Sunshine, Sunny Sleeps Late, Set Me Free, No You Don't, Rebel Rouser, AC/DC, Rock and Roll Disgrace, Turn It Down, Fever of Love, The Lies in Your Eyes, Love is Like Oxygen, Call Me, Live for Today, Do It All Over Again, and especially Coco, Papa Joe, California Nights, New York Groove, and 60s Man. You can see that Evan David doesn't just pop these songs at the top of his head. He does a ton of work on it. Now we're going to get to my favorite tracks. Honorable mention, we're going to go with The 16s, and I thought that was really well written, and Blockbuster. Faves, Little Willy, the Ballroom Blitz, and in action, the number 4 song and my favorite is Fox on the Run. So, as Evan David said at the end of his introductory write-up, let us know what you think of this list below. What order would you have had it on? What should have been on it? But remember, man, be respectful, be nice. It takes a ton of time to put these together. If you've never put together a top 10 songs or one of your favorite artists, I invite you to try it because it is very, very difficult to start ordering things and what do you cut and all that good stuff. But until next time, guys, I will see you.